go down through the items. So first, I will take a attendance. Do we have John Steinman?
Present.
Michael Booten?
Here.
Nick Hemmerich?
Present.
Erica Rio?
Present.
Eddie Wazizak?
Present.
And Rich Maury?
Present.
Okay, so all are accounted for. So I would look for a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved. Seconded.
So moved by John, seconded by Rich.
Yes.
Okay. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor? Councillor Steinman?
Aye.
Councillor Booten?
Aye.
Councillor Hemmerich?
Aye.
Councillor Rio?
Aye.
Councillor Wazizak?
Aye.
Councillor Maury?
Aye.
And I am aye as well. That is approved. I do not see the clerk on currently, but I'm just going to go back and check. I do not see her for the city clerk and treasurer's report. So we will go past the report for now. We might have to just defer that until later if she does call in at a later time. The liquor control, same thing. And Steve McKenzie, as the manager, popped it in. He's going to try to log in, but so we are quickly moving to visitors and communications. For anyone that wants to call in, there's a number right here. I don't have anyone present in the room. I will note that for our next meeting, the intent will be that during the COVID response time, there is not a physical location for the meeting, so this will be completely virtual at the next meeting. And I do not have any calls. Anything else for visitors and communications for those that are on the phone or on the go-to meeting? Okay, hearing none. The phone number is included for the meeting right on the invite. Just call in. It's right in his meeting invite. Right on his calendar. So that was me having a conversation with Rick Taft and City Manager Steve McKenzie just to try to get him logged in. So we will need to do so because the items on the list beyond visitors and communications are old business, which the manager will be providing the COVID-19 city response and update, as well as the revenue impacts, along with the financial director, and then we'll go from there. So maybe I'll do this a little early while we're waiting for the manager to come on. It is visitors and communication, and roundtable is something that is similar. Is there anything that any councilor would like to mention now that we could have as part of this time instead of at the end of the meeting? I'll just go down through the list again. Councillor Steinman, is there anything you wanted to bring up?
No.
Councillor Booten, is there anything you would like to bring up?
Yeah, so as we're virtually meeting everywhere and virtual online excitement, I just want to make a shout out to Tracy. She has been doing the partnership with the Facebook page and drumming up support for our downtown folks. Letting people know that there's businesses that are still open, and just want to give her a shout out for that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hemmerich?
So I paid my water and sewer bill online, and it was really easy. And I just talked to a neighbor who paid their dog license online, and so it's nice to have that opportunity to pay online, and it goes so well.
Okay. Councillor Rio?
I also want to give a shout out to the Barre partnership for keeping us up to date about what business they're doing. I've also had people reach out to me for Barre Mutual Aid. Thank you for the volunteers doing that. Also, I've also had people reach out to me that they're giving out credit cards and debit cards to people to pay for groceries. And please don't give out personal information to strangers. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wazizak?
Yeah, pretty much everything that's already been mentioned. I had some friends in other communities reach out to me about the daily updated lists from the Barre Partnership of the different businesses that were at different degrees of open throughout the community, and other communities reached out to me and were like, hey, that's really cool. Are you guys doing that? And then nope, point them towards the partnership. And a lot of great community work going on with the mutual aid. I did some volunteer work this week. And it is really nice to be able to help out neighbors even in these dire circumstances that we find ourselves in.
And Councillor Maury?
Yeah, I don't know if anyone's noticed or seen the postings online. I saw from Renita Marshall the daily positivity posts on the billboard for the auditorium down on Main Street. There's a rotating batch of positivity posts that are going through, and I think with what we're going through, it's nice to be able to drive through the downtown and see those positivity posts, and it's an uplifting message for everybody. So kudos for that. It's a great idea.
Okay, thank you. And I'm just going to echo the comments from Councillor Wazizak. The Central Vermont Regional Planning Commission actually has a full list of what all the different communities are doing. You can go out onto their website, and it's something I posted out on Front Porch Forum today. But you can see what we're doing compared to what Montpelier is doing, or Berlin, or anyone really from our area. So it's a good tool to see how we're working together for mutual aid. There's a lot of good work that's going on, and with that, I'm not going to belabor it. We do have the city manager online. Steve, I'm going to turn it over to you for your city manager's report. And while you're going through that, I'm going to try to contact the city clerk to make sure that she can be online as well. So, Steve, you're on mute right now, but if you want to mute yourself.
I'm just calling Carol now, if you give me 1 second. Hi. Hey, the access code, if you want to write this down. Yeah, I think so. So, 468-890-517. Try that. Rick and I had the same problem. Exact, yes. Try that. Okay. Am I back?
You're still here.
Okay. Do you have that code? I don't. Just wait 1 second. We didn't get the invite. 468-890-517.
So, Steve, you're on. We see you.
I know that. I'm not good at disappearing. So, you ready for a manager's report?
Yes, sir.
Okay. It'll be brief. This past week, we've had 2 more conference sessions for negotiations on the pool project scoping and contract amount. We have at least 1 more session tomorrow. I'm still hopeful that we'll be able to make an award recommendation next Tuesday. So, as I'd said in a prior email, we'll be deferring that agenda item for this evening. We did submit today the USDA Community Facilities Grant application for the ADA access ramp at the Wheelock Building, and they acknowledged receipt, so now it's in their hands for processing. This afternoon, I participated in a municipal manager's Zoom conference call with my peers from six communities: Montpelier, Brattleboro, St. Albans, Middlebury, Winooski. And generally speaking, we're dealing with similar and different issues with respect to coping with the COVID crisis. We're all feeling our way along, trying to react to the state and federal guidance. We're all dealing with impacts to revenue, impacts to workforce. We're still trying to get clarification on some of the state and federal guidance. So it's really, as I said, feeling our way on a day-by-day proposition. We will meet again, or conference again in a week to compare notes and update. And then the last minor item I had, maybe a minor ray of good news, is the winter parking ban ends tomorrow.
It actually ends tonight.
Yeah, tomorrow was the safe answer. Considering what we went through in the fall. So that's all I have.
Okay, are there any questions for the manager? Okay.
Hey, Steve, I had one question. I saw in the department head report that there's been an appeal of the development review board decision for the Salvation Army. Would we be able to get a copy of the findings and facts?
As soon as Janet is preparing, I guess a memo. As soon as I get that memo, we'll distribute it. Apparently, my understanding is that the appeal is actually heard by the environmental court, but the council can negotiate a settlement if it were so inclined. But I don't understand yet the mechanics of how that happens with the council even interested. So I'm trying to get that guidance to you just as soon as we can.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. Any other councilors have any questions for the manager? Okay. Seeing none, Carol, we will go back for the city clerk and treasurer's report.
Okay, can someone fill me in on the consent agenda? Did you take that action?
We have taken all the actions up through the manager's report and visitors and communications. So it's just your city clerk and treasurer's report, and if there's anything under liquor control.
Okay, can someone tell me the consent agenda, mover, seconder?
Yeah, we are being recorded right now. It was moved by John and seconded by Rich.
And I'm assuming there was a poll vote and it was all unanimous?
Yes, it was.
Okay. I'd like to go back to that because there's a food establishment and entertainment license that need to be considered. That would have been in the consent agenda, but since I wasn't couldn't get on, they weren't mentioned, so I'd like to take them separately.
Sure.
It's a food establishment, a new food establishment, and a new entertainment license for Rossini at 159 North Main Street. That's the retail food establishment associated with Vermont Salumi. They're obviously not open at the moment, but they want to get all their ducks in a row to be prepared when they can. So those are before you for approval.
Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Sounds like moved by Rich and seconded by John. Okay. Any discussion? Okay. Seeing none, a roll call vote. Councillor Steinman?
Yes.
Councillor Booten?
Aye.
Councillor Hemrick?
Aye.
Councillor Reel?
Aye.
Councillor Wazazak?
Aye.
Councillor Maury?
Aye.
And I'm an aye as well. Okay, Carol, back to you.
Yep. Just a continuing reminder that we have expanded our online payments to include water and sewer taxes, dogs, parking tickets, planning and permitting permits. We've also expanded it to include ambulance payments. So those that adds to the other ways people can make payments, which include mailing things in or using the drop box on the front of City Hall. And I will tell people that the front of City Hall faces the park. You'd be surprised how big a question that has been over the last couple weeks. Where's the front of the building? The other thing, I've been exchanging emails over the last day or two with our two legislative representatives. There has been discussion in the House Government Operations Committee with regards to charter changes that have been presented to the legislature and how what the communities feel as far as whether they need to try to shoehorn them into this odd session they're having this year. I told them I would ask the council as to what their thoughts are. The three items that, if you'll recall, the three items that we had on the agenda, on the ballot that were approved by the voters, one of them was cleaning up the language associated with business or contracts between city and officials and employees to take out the dollar amount and to refer instead to our procurement policy and conflict of interest policies. The second thing we did was remove the language associated with the grand juror. And then the last thing we did was to remove the language associated with the security deposit and to remove all reference to the Housing Board of Review. So I'd like to be able to report back to House of Ops where the council is. I know that's a lot of information, and so if you would like, we could put it on the agenda for next week for more discussion.
So for general guidance, if this is charter change language similar to what other communities are doing, did they have any feedback on what other communities had stated?
They haven't even taken it up. What they're looking for right now is whether they can defer it to next session in light of where they are this year and how many things are being pushed to the back burner.
Just a general nod of the head, councilors. Do you see any reason why we need to have any of these taken up now, or could they all be pushed to the next session?
Question.
Everybody with consensus set them for next agenda or the next legislative agenda? Okay, so Carol, I've got the nods for the most part saying if they can't handle it in this session because of the current situation, that makes sense, and to please address it within the next legislative session.
Okay, I will let them know. And then I don't have anything else under my report. I do have items under liquor control that were included in the packet.
Okay, they are in session.
And first of all, I'll start with you may have noticed that under the first class and second class licenses, Rossini is listed, the new retail space associated with Vermont Salumi. This is a new license, and traditionally the process for new license holders or applicants has been that they are invited to come before council. We're in extraordinary circumstances, so I don't know how council would like to address that. I don't know whether you'd like to take those license applications separately and perhaps approve all the others, which are all renewals. I leave it up to you.
I think we can forego the visit. I don't think it's necessary. I mean, Pete's been in front of the council already anyways.
Anyone else?
I tend to agree.
Yeah, I would agree as well. I think most of us have met him. I don't want to speak for anybody else that maybe that hasn't. But.
Okay, so it sounds like we will take all of them up at once. So I'll look for a motion. Yeah, oh, Jay, go ahead.
Yeah, I noticed the Elks missed 2 check boxes, and I wouldn't want that to delay their application in the Department of Liquor Control. So we might just want to give them a heads up on those 2 check boxes. The 2 questions that they had to answer.
Yeah, with regards to that, for incomplete applications, the best process is to move them through on our end and let the Department of Liquor and Lottery follow through on their end.
Okay. Any other discussion? Seeing none, I'll look for a motion to approve the liquor licenses.
So moved.
Second.
And moved by Rich, seconded by John. Seeing no other discussion, I'll go down through for the motion. Councillor Steinman?
Aye.
Councillor Booten? Councillor Hemrick?
Aye.
Councillor Riedel?
Aye.
Councillor Wozniak?
Aye.
Councillor Maury?
Aye.
I am an aye as well. Thank you very much. Anything else, Carol?
Nope.
Okay, thank you. So with that, we'll move on to item 8A, which is under old business, the COVID-19 city response update, discussion, and/or actions. Steve, we'll turn this back over to you.
Okay, I don't think we have any actions under this item this evening. Just a few things to report. I did designate Deputy Fire Chief Joe Walsworth as the city's liaison to the Washington and Northern Orange Counties Regional Response Command Center. That's a mouthful. Sponsored by Downstreet and Capstone, and their focus is among a number of groups, aiding the homeless, providing meals to those who need them. I think I saw in the paper today they're providing about 200 meals a day. They're organized under the ICS, the Incident Command System, and they've asked for a liaison from the city, and so I asked Joe, or designated Joe Walsworth to fill that position. In the last week, we've had 3 advisory task force coordination morning meetings. That the advisory task force is literally the department head group. Most of our last week has been dealing with COVID logistics, including responding to and implementing operational protocols, especially since the issuance of the governor's stay-home order last Thursday. That really ramped things up. We've issued 4 staff guidance memos dealing with the COVID response, the Federal Paid Sick Leave Act briefing, a mandatory direct deposit for paychecks. We opted to go that way just to minimize the handling of checks. The old way of dealing with checks was for department heads to come in, pick them up, bring them out to their staff, and then distribute them by hand. We just felt that half of our staff was already on direct deposit, and we felt it was an opportunity to utilize that for the rest of the staff and just minimize the personal contact, improve the separation. And actually, as of yesterday, I think all but 4 employees were signed up, and the remaining 4 anticipate signing up. Is just a matter of getting the paperwork completed. We also issued the staff time tracking and leave policy for the COVID-19 response, and we'll talk about that next. Then Rick prepared a frequently asked questions memo to the staff addressing frequently asked questions and try to provide the best guidance we can. And then the better part of the last 2 days at the department head level has been spent addressing the budget impacts of the COVID crisis. Don, as you know, prepared an initial cut at the budget projections, which we issued over the weekend. We've spent 2 days going through that, literally line by line. We're not complete yet, but Don will report out on the progress we've made. That memo over the weekend projected a $250,000 year-end deficit. We've made improvements to that, but Don will speak to that shortly. So that's been most of the last week dealing with COVID.
So, Council, any questions other than the financial questions related to the COVID response? Okay. Seeing none, then I'll move on to item 8B, which is the COVID-19 update regarding the FY20 revenue impacts and year-end deficit projections. So, Don?
Yeah, I'll ask Don to take the lead. I may add some perspective as we go through the discussion, but I'll turn it over to Don.
And Don, you're currently muted.
There, now can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. So, on the Monday report, or let me back up. My revenue projection since last council meeting was a shortfall of $400,000. That stays pretty consistent. We are focusing more on going over our expenses when we met with the department heads and where we could make some significant changes and cuts. So as of Monday, the report that you guys were sent over the weekend showed a deficit of $250,000. We have identified cost cutting and kind of like a freeze on unnecessary spending that cut the cost to about $200,000 of a deficit from $250,000. We are continuing to monitor our projections, and we're working to identify more areas. I know the manager and myself and the department heads will be meeting again to do another good scrub. I'll have another update as soon as I can. I think it was, can't remember, I think it might have been Jake who had asked about our fund balance as it stands. Coming into fiscal year 20, we were at a deficit of $37,000, and now with my projection of a $200,000 deficit, we're at $237,000.
Questions from
council?
Jake?
Thanks, Don. I was wondering why is the police department projected to be $196,000 over budget?
I think, well, go ahead, Don, if you had.
No, go ahead. You got it.
I think generally that the biggest hit probably comes from overtime. I mean, overtime just seems to be the third rail of budgeting. We over the years we try to get the budgeted amount of overtime at the right magnitude, but it seems like we always come up short. That overtime is impacted to a large degree by officer absences or vacancies. We have one officer who's out now, who's on third shift, which is there's no flexibility in filling that position. This is just an example. So without having the budget in front of me and going through it, I would say that the likely big cause is overtime.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's the third shift. When people are out, they have to cover at 100% overtime.
On other shifts, which are staffed by as many as 4, if one person is out or injured or whatever, the chief tries to manage with 3, so that vacant position isn't backfilled on that day or for that period of time. But the third shift it's staffed with 2 officers, and if one is out, there's no choice; it has to be backfilled.
Any other questions from council?
I was just had one other question there about our pension obligations. So in the wastewater state revolving loan fund application last week, there was a note that we had a $2.6 million pension obligation. What's and maybe now is not the time for this discussion, but I was just curious what the plan is for that. And I noticed we have I think it was a $57,000 projected deficit for our pension line.
Do you have a line item for that one, Jake?
I'm trying to catch up. I don't.
Line 659 of the Excel. It's a roughly 58,000 overrun on pension. However, largely offset by a savings in line 655 in insurance.
So in the Excel sheet, is this under the budget versus actuals tab? Or is this
correct,
on?
Yep.
Okay.
Line 659 of the Excel line number.
Any other questions?
Jake, as for the liability that you were mentioning, I'll get back to you on that.
Thanks.
Okay. So if we can, we'll just get a report back out during the city manager's report for next week, if that's fine with everybody. Okay. Okay, any other questions for Don or the financials for the end of year deficit projection or FY20 revenue impacts? Okay.
I might add that in the discussions that I had today with some of the 5 of the other managers, there are other municipalities that are struggling with the same thing. I think Montpelier's might be in the same order of magnitude. Brattleboro similarly so. Middlebury and St. Albans not so much, but this is not an uncommon problem.
Okay. Thank you. Moving on, we're at item 9C. We've noted that 9A and B were both deferred. So item 9C is the consideration or action regarding the extending of overnight parking permits. Carol, are you still on the line?
Still here. You'll recall that a couple weeks ago we had a discussion about the way we wanted to treat people who had purchased overnight parking permits because they live in the downtown, but they work elsewhere, so they didn't need daytime parking permits. However, in the current circumstances, they had been let go or furloughed, or were working from home, and so found themselves parking in the downtown during the day. And so what we did was we said what council approved was allowing those with overnight permits to be treated as 24-hour permits through April 3rd, which is the end of this week. And we said we would bring it back for further council action in advance of that. So, of course, the situation remains the same, if not more so, since the stay-home, stay-safe order. And I do know that the manager in the next item is going to have some additional information about parking and enforcement. So I don't know whether it makes more sense to roll this all into that discussion or whether council would like to take it separately.
So Steve, just as a quick question, were you going to have a recommendation for a timeline for consideration in your next item? And I'm only asking because if we can address the 24-hour permit allowance with a date, maybe we can address this before moving on to the next item.
Yeah, I mean, everybody's crystal ball is murky. I would say June 30th.
So to allow the daytime permits to be considered as 24-hour permits until June 30th?
Well, I was speaking specifically to the waiver of the meter fees. At this point, Carol, doesn't overnight parking go away with the elimination of the ban?
These are people who live in the downtown, and so they park in the designated areas, like behind Nelson's, over in the Elm Street lot. These are not people who have access to on-street parking on streets that don't have parking meters. You know, people who live like on Seminary Street or areas like that, where once the winter parking ban is over, they can just park on their streets. People who actually live in the apartments that are downtown, this is their only option unless they want to walk 6 blocks to their car.
So, Councilor Moore, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I think June 30th is a very friendly date. However, I think we should follow the federal guidelines and go with May 30th for the time being, and then we stick to those. I say we say right now we're going to stick to the federal guidelines. We go May 30th. If that gets extended out, whether either by the federal government or by the state level, we follow those guidelines. And that would be my recommendation.
That makes sense. April. Pessimist. But that.
I completely agree. I mean, June 30th is. I mean, who knows where it will be? I just think if we stay on track with where the government level is going, then we're going to be right in line with what's going on.
And that makes sense, and I'm certainly fine with that.
So, Councillor Maury, is that your motion to extend the overnight parking permit through the May 30th deadline?
Yes, and then I would also add that we pay close attention. Either we follow the guidance from the state or the federal government level on their recommendation, or we can revisit it when we need to.
Okay. Is there a second to the motion to extend the deadline through May 30th?
Seconded.
I'll second it.
Okay. So a motion was made by Councillor Maury, seconded by Councillor Wazazak, and thirded, but we can't go that far. So. Any other discussion?
Right. And I like the idea, but it takes so little of our time to address this that maybe we should do it on a monthly basis, so that it takes us no time. So why not just deal with it monthly?
Actually, I think that's a pretty good idea. I mean, the federal guidelines, I thought were until April 30th.
So the May 30th date sticks in my head because I know that Green Update has been postponed, and I believe it's May 30th. The guidelines from the federal government, I believe it was an additional 30 days. So that would put us into about that same time frame, I believe, April 30th. So I don't remember the May 30th other than that. Rich, do you have any more information on that guideline?
I just thought I'd seen that they were recommending the federal government was recommending through May 30th. I agree with what you're saying, though, with Green Update being pushed to May 30th. It just seems like a day that would.
I agree, and I think the other thing to consider is even that when things do quote unquote reopen, some folks may have been laid off and are not going back to work right away. This may be a gradual reopening, so even if some things do start operating by the 1st of May, they may not be fully operating. Some of these folks might still be home or might still be working from home if things reopen with a reduced workforce. So I think that erring on the side of caution during this whole thing is helpful for us.
Okay. Any other discussion?
I don't see how we're erring on anything if we can revisit it every month and just keep extending it. It's the same end result. I mean, we could go all the way to the end of the year if we decided to on a month-by-month decision. That way, we're reacting to what's really going on the ground. We're not trying to use that crystal ball and look so far down the road. That's all I got to say.
But my suggestion is if you want to do it on a 30-day basis, you might do it to May 5th. I mean, that's the first council meeting in May. I mean, it's kind of an odd date. Or I guess you could go May 1st and then decide on April 28th if you want to extend it.
So for the date itself, rather than being on a council meeting day, I think what Carol's recommendation before was at an end of a week. So if we were handling it that way, we would be able to support staff better that way. So I've heard a couple different dates, but we do have a motion on the table. Rich, do you want to stick with your motion?
I'm perfectly fine amending it to a different date. I just thought May 30th would be enough time for everybody to, the businesses to see what was going on and to us to move forward from there. So, I mean, if somebody else has a more agreeable date, I'm fine with that.
Well, this is currently out there. Councillor Wazazak still has his second in support of this. I say we put this to a vote, and if it passes, great. If not, we can go through and discuss a different date. Is there any other discussion before we do so? Okay, hearing none. The motion is to extend the overnight parking through May 30th as the deadline. I'll go through the votes. Councillor Steinman?
No.
Councillor Booten?
Aye.
Councillor Hemrick,
Aye.
Councillor Reel,
Aye.
Councillor Wazazak,
Aye.
Councillor Maury,
Aye.
and I am an aye as well. Carol, did you have anything else that you wish to cover under that agenda item?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So council, we'll move on to item 9D, which is the approval of interim policy regarding the waiver of meter fees, collections, and enforcement. Steve?
Yeah, well, I didn't put forth anything in writing. It really, I think, is picking up on the suggestion of Councillor Maury, I think a couple of weeks ago. The idea would just to be, there's hardly any parking downtown now anyways. So just to waive meter fees, collections, and enforcement of parking meters. There would still be enforcement of parking in restricted areas like a handicapped access or in front of a hydrant or too close to curb. I mean, those aren't high volume items, but it's not a blanket waiver where you can park anywhere.
Okay. So as part of that, did you have a date where this is a approval of an interim policy until?
Yeah, I would go with the same date that you just voted for the overnight parking. Let's just be consistent in the dates. It just makes that much easier for everybody.
Okay. Is there a motion to the approval of the interim policy regarding the waiver of meter fees, collections, and enforcement through May 30th?
I'll make that motion as well.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, so motion by Councillor Maury, seconded by Councillor Reel, I believe. Any discussion? Yes, Councillor Steinman.
What's the financial impact of doing this?
We don't have that quantified, but quite frankly, I think it's very little because there's virtually no parking downtown now anyway.
Under normal circumstances, we collect about $10,000 a month in parking meter fees, but drive through the downtown these days and it's a ghost town, so.
It's a wash, really, anyway.
Yeah.
Councillor Hemrick, you had your hand up as well.
Yeah, my question was just going to be if it's going to affect any of the businesses that are doing takeout or curbside service, and but it sounds like there's just really, really low demand. But
And that's actually what my recommendation was based on that. Is, I would hate to see somebody pull up and run inside to get a pickup and come out with an $8 parking ticket and choose not to frequent that business that's trying to stay open and survive.
This would actually facilitate that, Council.
The only question I have on that is we're facilitating those curbside type pickups, but if somebody elected to park in that parking spot in front of a store, there's no enforcement to have them move, correct? So curbside pickup still isn't designated to any store or business. It's first come, first served for those spots.
Yeah, but the brutal reality is somebody wouldn't be taking the last available space. If somebody's parking in the prime space, then you just go one space further. The reality is just no parking.
so there are like downtown residents who are going to park there all day long in front of these businesses.
There'll be some of that, I'm sure, but quite honestly, when I stop to think about where the restaurant businesses are that are doing most of the takeout, they're probably not in the same area that the apartment dwellers might park. I really don't think there'll be a conflict at all. Judgment call, but that's my perception.
He still walks around, right? Or is she walking around?
Right now, she is.
Okay. So, because I know that if people were staying in parking lots longer than 2 hours, if I recall, during the Christmas parking program, if you stay in there for 2 hours,
Yeah, but Counselor, we're under totally different circumstances. If somebody could stay in that parking lot for 8 hours, and it really wouldn't adversely impact anybody because they can
Okay.
basically.
That's fine. I mean, I didn't know if she was still doing that. That's all. Would she tell people to move that are, staying in the 2-hour parking longer than 2 hours? I don't even know if she's able to remember that. Knowing how often she is, she probably can.
As of now, she is. She's doing the route.
Right. So in the future, though, Steve, I think that's no longer the intent. If somebody ends up being there for 8 hours,
Okay.
It's not something that will be enforced.
Right.
Okay. Any other discussion? Okay. Hearing none, we do have a motion. Just to reiterate, this is to the interim policy for the waiver of meter fees collection and enforcement through May 30th. So for the vote, please note as aye or nay. Councillor Steinman.
Aye.
Councillor Booten.
Aye.
Councillor Hemrick.
Aye.
Councillor Reel.
Aye.
Councillor Wazazak.
Aye.
Councillor Maury.
Aye.
And I am an aye as well. Steve, anything else for that item on the agenda?
No.
Okay, thank you. So moving on to item 9E, which is the approval of the COVID-19 employee sick quarantine leave policy, payroll policy. Steve?
Yeah, I also have Rick. I asked Rick to fit in. I don't know how comfortable you folks are. I mean, we issued 11-page memo trying to succinctly summarize the guidance we were getting from the federal government. This was back on the 25th, last Wednesday. Rick, I think it's fair to say that the guidance has been changed ever since. I had hoped to try to augment this with a one-page, maybe one-paragraph succinct summary of what does this translate to. I haven't been able to do that. Rick, correct me if I'm wrong, but trying to distill this 11-page memo into a basic policy, I think it basically amounts to essentially those employees who aren't able to work from home, or any employee who's frankly not working, can either elect to take unemployment or use their benefits, either sick leave or vacation. I think that's also been augmented, Rick, by guidance from the federal government that they'll be issuing $600 additions. As I understand it, a flat fixed amount of $600 per week for those who are on unemployment. That's the best distillation I can give you right now. I don't know if that's firm enough for the council to vote on. And I would defer to the council's judgment if you want us to take another week to try to firm this up into something more succinct. I'm more than willing to do that. I mean, it's really a moving target right now. In the conference call I had today with the other municipalities, they're all struggling with the same thing.
So, Rick, go ahead.
So one of the problems is that the legislation that came out from the federal government is very unclear as to the definitions and what they mean. So even at the state level, they've been trying to get clearer, more defined definitions. You know, what is an isolation order? What Governor Scott issued is not, according to what we're getting, is not considered an isolation order. So the COVID 30 days, the 80 hours of COVID paid leave only applies to somebody that would either be diagnosed, taking care of somebody that's diagnosed, showing symptoms, things like that. So trying to decipher that, and then how that impacts unemployment and who's on unemployment. So like Steve said, if we have people that are unavailable for work, because they either A, can't work at home, or B, are just not, their work is not considered essential. Even though all the work is essential, we've tried to pare down as much as we could staffing to make sure that we are only dealing with essential functions at this point, as much as possible. So there's so much gray area right now that on an hourly basis we're getting updates and changes to the way that we're supposed to be interpreting this legislation. So it's very difficult to put something concrete in place because it's still developing. They put this bill together and passed it very quickly, and because of that, there's a lot of questions that were not thought out and not answered. Obviously, we're trying to deal with the impact as far as how will unemployment impact our staff. If we have Beamer's staff, there's a significant impact. We've reached out to Beamer's trying to get determination if the state, the way Beamer's works, it's based on your 3 highest consecutive years. So if somebody's within 5 years of retirement, this would fall into that category, which means that they would have to either push their retirement out to get 3 higher consecutive years, or they're going to take a hit on their retirement if they go on unemployment. So there's a lot of pieces to the puzzle that Steve and I are still trying to work through, with the guidance of VLCT, with the guidance of the state. Other municipalities are also trying to define what's going on and how they're going to handle it. So we're still working through it, and I think Steve's recommendation of maybe having something more concrete, more compact in the next few days, or even for next council, would be a prudent thing to do.
So, Rick and or Steve, with the guidance that you've already provided staff, have there been many questions that have come up? And then the second part of the question is related to other municipalities or guidance from VLCT. Have you seen any discrepancies or issues compared to what you're currently looking to implement?
Rick, I'll go first. I don't think I've had any questions. The likelihood is if folks have questions, they might likely go to Rick first. In terms of other municipalities, again, I think they're still trying to sort through this too. There was nothing that came out in today's conversations that said somebody was doing something dramatically different than the other community. We're still trying to deal with the getting clear definition of unemployment benefits, how those apply, who they're eligible for. So that's still cloudy. And Rick,
yeah, and in addition to that, I mean, we have gotten questions. They vary from, if I'm out, should I apply for unemployment? Should I be using sick leave? What if I don't want to use my sick leave? How should I handle that? General questions, how's it going to impact my retirement? All those. The biggest discrepancy that we've seen, and it's not something that we put out in the memo because it really didn't pertain to the information that we needed to give staff, but one of the things that was initially thought was, number one, under the federal mandate, was if the federal, state, or local government issues a quarantine or isolation order, then all this falls into place. We're finding out quickly that what Governor Scott did is not an isolation order. So that rules out number one, which would apply to a lot of our staff, which then moves us down the list to number two, which is if somebody's diagnosed. And we also are figuring out that this mandate, as far as it is and stands right now, public entities are exempt from recouping any of the costs for staffing under the 80 hours, which means it would be an unfunded mandate if we had people out. We still have to do it. We just aren't following under the public sector or private sector, which actually gets reimbursed through payroll tax or something to that effect. So that's another piece that we didn't actually put it in the letter because it didn't really impact the staff. They didn't really care how the city gets paid. They're just more concerned about how are they going to get paid. but it is a piece that has come to light with more definition from the government.
So, Councillor Moore, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I have a question. Are we people that are unable to work due to COVID-19? Are we putting their time in differently as COVID-19 so that those hours are separated out from regular payroll? And if we are doing that, does that payroll end up getting reimbursed from the federal government because of the emergency declaration? So I guess another way of saying is, instead of coding their payroll as, PTO or vacation time, are we coding those hours that are missed due to COVID as COVID-19 so that we would know exactly how many hours are missed?
I'm going to guardedly say the answer to that question is yes. Don has set up separate coding for payroll and expenses related to COVID, but I think that it's not black and white, so whether we're dealing with that with perfection right now or not, I'm not sure, but we've put the basics in place, trying to get it uniformly applied. It may take another week or two.
So, I guess what I would say is we do have a document that's out there. It's something that can provide guidance. It's a policy, so if we need to make revisions, we can make revisions as soon as next week when we meet again. I don't see there an issue with having this as a policy in place for now. It's better guidance than if we don't have anything out there. So I guess my recommendation to council would be that we move forward and have this in place as something that Rick, as the human resources person, can work on. And if there are recommendations for further changes to the sick and quarantine leave payroll policy, that we make those adjustments along the way.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
I'd like to just make one change, and I believe in the copy you folks have, and I don't even know if you have it in front of you, but I guess I would point out on page 6 of the memo, under employer obligations for payment, we had a paragraph that said after the first 10 days of leave, the employer shall provide paid leave for each day at a rate not less than 2/3 of the regular rate of pay for the number of hours the employee would normally be scheduled to work. And I believe that was based on unemployment election. I had inserted a comment that said you can use your accrued city benefits time to make up the difference if you wish, and I was wrong. That's incorrect. Rick pointed out that you can't do that under the unemployment law. So I just want to comment that the policy would be modified to strike out that clause of being able to make up the difference with your accrued benefits.
And you said on page 6?
Yes. It's on his second indented paragraph.
Okay. I was just trying to pull it up so that I could share it with everybody, so that we could see it all at once.
Yep.
Mr. Mayor, when you're ready, I have a couple questions.
Sure. So just bear with me 1 second. So can you say that section again within?
It's on page 6. It's the second indented paragraph.
Second indented paragraph.
It starts out in bold. Yeah, after the first 10 days. So if you go, scroll down just a little. No, the next paragraph. On the second to last line, it says halfway over, you can use your accrued city benefits time to make up the difference if you wish. That line right there, that's incorrect. And I've stricken that from the policy, or from the guidance.
Okay, Councilor Wozniak, you have questions?
Yeah, and just for the record, Steve, I do see the strikeout there. The one that was sent out in the Friday packet, I do see your strikeout.
All right, I've just lost track of which one.
Yeah, no, just for the record. So my question is, I guess for Rick and Steve, my first question is the table 1 that was provided, that guidance came from the federal government, that table, or is that something we developed?
That is from the federal government. That's in the FFCRA, the new act, Emergency Care Leave Act.
Okay.
And that's where the confusion came in, because number one under that, there's real no definition of isolation, and so most people were thinking if I get told to stay home, that's an isolation order. The state is now saying that what Governor Scott issued is not an isolation order, so it negates number one.
Okay, so hopefully don't fix that. Okay. I like that. So then the other question is under this guidance. Would city, my reading of the memo was that city employees would not have to use their own sick time before accessing this time. Is that a correct understanding?
That is the correct understanding of the way the memo came out. Now that we've come to the understanding that number one doesn't apply because it's not considered an isolation order.
Okay.
If they don't have any of the following, number 2, 3, 4, 5, if they don't meet that criteria, then they're out because they're unable to telework or whatever it is, then they would either go on unemployment or they would utilize their accrued time.
Okay. So, and then my last question was under on page 10, during the series of question number 15 was, will employees be required to provide medical documentation to support their use of COVID sick time, for lack of a better term? Yes, and employees should anticipate supervisors, HR asking clarifying questions. Same question, is that guidance from the federal government or is that our policy?
That's our policy.
Okay.
The only reason some people are saying, no, we don't need it. Some people are saying, yes, we do. And we're saying you may get asked for it because we do have people that may not be completely truthful just to get paid leave. And unfortunately, you got to plan for that. So this way it gives us the ability to ask if we question it, if there was an exposure. Right now, it's pretty easy to call your doctor and get documentation that says, I've had symptoms, my wife has symptoms, we were exposed to somebody who did. So it shouldn't be an issue for anybody.
Okay, because it just, my concern with that is that, we know that I think it was the CDC came out with a statement today saying that up to 1/3 of the folks who end up having coronavirus might not even show symptoms of it. Those folks are still going to have to self-isolate and quarantine, and those may not be things for which people would go to their doctor for. And so it just seems like it seems like there's a lot of. I agree with you that it seems like there's a lot of loopholes. It seems like there might be enough circumstances in which they might not get medical.
And there may be, if somebody called me and said, look, I've had a fever for Steve has a mandate basically that if we're over a certain temperature, we're not supposed to come in. It's that same kind of mindset. You've got a fever, you've had a fever for 2 days. It'll be something where you call your department head and say, listen, I've had a fever for 2 days. Don't know if it's COVID. It could be something else.
Right.
What should I do? At that point, we make the recommendation you should stay out for 72 hours. That might fall under that because it is a symptom of COVID.
Right.
You may not need a doctor's note. If somebody just says, oh, I've got symptoms, I'm out for the next 2 weeks, you may question it. And if they've got any of the symptoms, we just recommend they call their doctor. And most of the doctors are just saying to be precautionary, they're out of work for 2 weeks or they're out of work for 4 days or whatever. So it's pretty easy to get the doctors to just approve them being out without even seeing them.
I hear that, and I definitely understand the concern there. But I don't think we should be requiring medical documentation for this at a time when, our healthcare system is already going to be continuously stretched and over capacity.
I think from the manager's standpoint, Counselor, it's just in situations like this, you hate to say it, but the reality is there's room for abuse. And this, quite frankly, allows management to have some reasonable tool to um, help avoid abuse and, frankly, deal with it if it exists where we suspect it. Nobody's looking to be the COVID cop, but I think it's a reasonable tool or criteria as we're trying to manage a very, very fluid situation. So
are you saying that you're going to, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, are you saying you're going to use this as a case by case, you're not going to require it for everybody?
Yeah, I'll guard it. I'm going to gradually say that. The intent is not to be onerous. The intent is not to add additional agony to somebody who's really, dealing with this. But by the same token, it's not. It's just not a check that if you don't feel like coming to work, you can stay home and claim COVID.
So, council, since we're doing what-if scenarios, and this is a policy, if we do hear of concerns where this is coming up as a large issue, we can always readdress this item specifically if needed.
Yeah, let me just sort of reiterate. So the intent is not to be onerous. The intent was to provide clear guidance, good, bad, or indifferent, so that everybody had the same playing field, the same rules, and as is often the case, there's a lot of things that just aren't black and white, and it's incumbent upon management to make reasonable decisions, and I expect this will be the same.
Absolutely, and I do want to just underscore that I completely respect that and completely respect the intent to ensure that taxpayer money in a time when taxpayer money is going to be stretched in to make sure that we're using those dollars as effectively as possible. I love pretty much. I read this policy and I was very, very impressed because I think it's a great policy. This was just one of the things that really stuck out to me.
Well, the bulk of the credit goes to. Rick spent. Without a resource like Rick, no way I could have produced this. Just with the demands of time. So, two key positions. Every position we have is key, but boy, in times like this, your finance director and your human resources administrator are just critical.
One thing I did want to mention, just to help clear some things. So when we're asking for doctor's notes, that's more or less just to determine how we're going to pay for it. Because if somebody's got the symptoms, they qualify for the 80 hours of COVID pay. That's an unfunded mandate right now on municipalities. It may change, who knows? Tomorrow it may be different. If they just need sick time off, they have sick time available to them. They could use that. But in regards to what Erica was saying, it's very, very gray area, and it's very difficult because we definitely have to keep in mind that there's ADA. There's discrimination acts that we got to be very careful of, that we're not targeting certain groups. I have people that I know have compromised immune systems, and I can't just go say, hey, we're going to put you out of work because I know you've got a compromised immune system. I can talk to them and say, look, for your own health and your own safety, it might be worth it. But we've got to be very careful of the federal guidelines still. They all still apply. And so it's not to target one group or another. It's just to try to make sure that we know how to handle things when it comes in.
So, Michael, you had your hand up.
State and federal government? Yeah, did you hear me?
Do we have faith in the federal government? Is that what you said?
No, I don't have faith in any. Anyway, I said unfunded mandates from the state and federal government. That can't be possible. With that, I'll make a motion to approve the COVID-19 policy.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion?
Can I make a motion to amend?
Sure.
Can I move to amend that we remove the requirement for medical documentation?
Okay. Is there a second?
Worth a shot.
Yeah. So without hearing a second, the amendment does not move forward. So we're back to the original motion which is
Excuse
to.
me, Mr. Mayor. Can you tell
Yes.
me who seconded the original motion? I believe Councilor Booton made it. Can you tell me who seconded it?
Councillor Steinman.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're back to the original motion, which is the approval of COVID-19 employee sick quarantine leave payroll policy. Any other discussion?
And
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, so I've heard staff members say that they want another week to work on this policy and make sure it's done right. I was also curious if it extends any new long-term financial liabilities that aren't mandates, as we face a $237,000 deficit, and what that could mean to maintaining our workforce over the long haul.
So either Steve or Rick, do you see there being any changes that would impact the finances based on changes that you would be making over the next week?
I don't see any changes that would impact us more than the ones that are already in there. The extended emergency FMLA, typically FMLA is an unpaid time off, unpaid leave that is basically protect your job and your benefits. In this case, being that it's paid up to 2/3 for anybody who has children out of school, that's got a significant potential impact on our budget. And I'm not sure where that's all going to fall. I know Don and I have talked about it. Steve and Don have talked about it. It's one of those things where how do you figure out who's got kids at home and who's going to take time off? We've been trying anybody that we can that has kids at home. We've been trying to set them up to work virtual. But there are some people who either don't have internet at home, don't have a fast enough connection. But we are trying to mitigate those by doing, telecommuting and things like that.
So, and by waiting a week, do you see anything that would be advantageous for the city or for staff?
I think things will change, but I don't know if it'll be advantageous to either or. Things are changing on an hourly basis right now.
I think what my goal would be to try to bring some more clarity to this. I'm fine with the motion that's on the table. We'll continue to work to try to clarify this guidance, and I think that'll be an ongoing task. I can put an item on the agenda for next week as a placeholder, and if we have anything new to report or more clarification or whatever, we can put that forward. If there's nothing to put forward, we don't have to take any action.
If you need more time I'm confused because I thought it was ready to go.
Well, when we put this out, we thought it was ready to go too.
Yeah, I think we're getting just a week ago.
There's changes that have been in the CC model. So by policy they set out, the guidance that they've set out, which could change. The concern I have is if we don't have anything in place, we don't have anything for anyone to go by. So I'd rather have a document that is a starting point that we can use to reference. And if it has to change, then it will, according with those different policies or guidance documents that will. Come out from either the state or federal government. Okay, any other comments? So the motion is still on the table.
I think Councilor Hemrick had a question.
Oh, is there another hand up?
Yeah, I guess I'm wondering why we're trying to codify state and federal law into a municipal policy, since those laws and the Department of Labor, they're going to issue guidance. It's going to be a fluid situation. Our HR staff can interpret those laws and communicate to employees. It seems without a policy as things are a moving target. But if we adopt a policy, then and we could potentially be in a situation where we have a policy that's not in sync with federal or state legal interpretations. I read through VLCT's memo today and was pretty confused as to what was and wasn't paid or was a mandate.
Good. Glad to hear it's not just me, Jake.
I agree that I put this on the agenda. Actually, where an issue is to the federal maintenance aware of how you're trying to do things. I would say no disrespect at all. This is the best tool we have when we can try to prevent it versus I come because we'll just so if you did endorse it, but you would know this is the roadmap you want to do elsewhere. So
I can see the way to my be a meta policy and most things that are going policies that are solidifying and fluid and fundraising.
we're calling out this guidance. Maybe take out what so.
Can insert that with the full policy.
I think we're probably hesitant about this training because the only guy was out of my that works more trying to hear the thing out my dad. Trying to stop.
This is also the amendment you're not and on a second at all. So the motion on the table would be just the line talking out here is the flow of the employees currently payroll guys. Administration tax. Yeah, take care. Any other discussion? None. Councilor Almer.
Aye.
Councilor Zach.
Aye.
Councilor Moore. Aye. Thank you much. Anything else you want to cover? Okay. We're at means committee or connection. Didn't have too much on it because it really was just a copy of it itself. We have secretary Andrews from affiliate group the relationship committee because we do have a solid waste management district, so it sounds very similar. And they also